This Abacakian product was housed in long pods, which dipped from shoulder-high bushes, and the pods were well equipped with horny projections which tore. A single try at making his way into one of those fields convinced Ross of the folly of such an advance. He sat back to nurse his scratched hands and survey the landscape. To go down a very tempting lane would be making himself a clear target for anyone in those buildings ahead. He had seen the flamers of the Baldies fail on the beach, but that did not mean the aliens were now weaponless. His best chance, Ross decided, was to circle north, come back down along the bed of a stream, and he was at the edge of that watercourse when a faint sound brought him to a frozen halt, weapon ready. Ross, Loken, and Torgal and Vistar. This was a party from the opposite side of the island, gone expertly to Earth. In the moonlight, Ross could detect no sign of their presence, yet their voices sounded almost beside him. They are in there, in the great hall. That was Torgal. But no longer are there any lights. Now, an urgent explanation drew their attention. Light below, but not the glow of the rods Ross had seen on the beach. This was a warm, yellow red of honest fire, bursting up, the flames growing higher as if being fed with frantic haste. 3 figures were moving down there. Ross began to believe that there were only this trio ashore. He could sight no weapons in their hands, which did not necessarily mean they were unarmed. But the stream ran close behind the rear wall of one of the buildings, and Ross thought his bed could provide cover for a man who knew what he was doing. He pointed out as much to Torgal. And if their magic works and you are drawn out to be killed, the rover captain came directly to the point. This is a chance to be taken. But remember, the magic of the Phalana at the sea gate did not work against me. Perhaps this won't either. Once earlier I won against it. Have you then another hand to give to the fire as your defense? That was Vistor. But no man has the right to order another's battle challenge. Just so, replied Ross sharply, and this is a thing I have long been trained to do. He slid down into the stream bed. Approaching from this angle, the structures of the fairing were between him and the fire. So screened, he reached a log wall, got to his feet and edged along it. Then he witnessed a wild scene. The fire raged in great sky-touching tongues, and already the roof of one of the rover buildings smoldered. Why the aliens had built up such a conflagration, Ross could not guess. A signal designed to reach some distance? He did not doubt there was some urgent purpose, for the 3 were dragging in fuel with almost frenzied haste, bringing out of the rover buildings bales of cloth to be ripped apart and whirled into the devouring flames, furniture, everything movable which would burn. There was one satisfaction. The Baldies were so intent upon this destruction that they kept no watch, save that now and then one of them would run to the head of the path leading to the lagoon and listen as if he expected a Salkar to come pounding up the slope. They're rattled. Ross could hardly believe it. The Baldies, who had always occupied his mind and memory as practically invisible supermen, were acting like badly frightened primitives. And when the enemy was off balance, you pushed. You pushed hard. Ross thumbed the button on the grip of the strange weapon. He sighted with deliberation and fired. The blue figure at the top of the path wilted, and for a long moment neither of his companions noted his collapse. Then one of them whirled and started for the limp body, his colleague running after him. Ross allowed them to reach his first victim before he fired the second and third time. All 3 lay quiet, but still Ross did not venture forth until he had counted off a dozen Terran seconds. Then he slipped forward, keeping to cover until he came up to the bodies. The blue-clad shoulder had a flaccid feel under his hand, as if the muscles could not control the flesh about them. Ross rolled the alien over, looked down in the bright light of the fire into the Baldy's wide-open eyes. amazement. The Terran thought he could read that in the dead stare which answered his intent gaze. And then anger, a cold and deadly anger which chilled into ice. "Kill!" Ross slewed around, still down on one knee, to face the charge of a rover. In the firelight, the Avakian's eyes were blazing with fanatical hatred. He had his hooked sword ready to deliver a finishing stroke. The Terran blocked with a shoulder to meet the rover's knees, threw him back. Then Ross landed on top of the fighting crewman, trying to pin the fellow to earth and avoid that recklessly slashing blade. "Locust! Vistor!" Ross shouted as he struggled. More of the rovers appeared from between the buildings, bearing down on the limp aliens and the two fighting men. Ross recognized the limping gait of Locust, using a branch to aid him into a running shuttle across the open. "Locust, here!" The Avakian covered the last few feet in a dive which carried him into Ross and the rover. "Hold him," the Terran ordered, and had just time enough to throw himself between the Baldies and the rest of the crew. There was a snarling from the rovers, and Ross, knowing their temper, was afraid he could not save the captives, which they considered fairly their legitimate prey. He must depend upon the hope that there were one or two cooler heads among them with enough authority to restrain the would-be avengers. Otherwise, he would have to beam them into helplessness. "Torgal!" he shouted. There was a break in the line of runners speeding for him. The big man lunging straight across could only be Vistor. The other, yelling orders, was Torgal. It would depend upon how much control the captain had over his men. Ross scrambled to his feet. He had clicked on the beamer to its lowest frequency. It would not kill, but would render its victim temporarily paralyzed. And how long that state would continue, Ross had no way of knowing. Tried on Terran laboratory animals, the time had varied from days to weeks. Vistar used the flat side of his war axe, clapping it against the foremost runners, setting his own bulk to impose a barrier. And now Torgal's orders appeared to be getting through. More and more of the men slacked, leaving a trio of hotheads. Two of them Vistar sent reeling with his fist. The captain came up to Ross. "They are alive, then?" He leaned over to inspect the Baldy the Terran had rolled on his back, assessing the alien's frozen stare with thoughtful measurement. "Yes, but they cannot move." "Well enough," Torgal nodded. "They shall meet the justice of Putka after the law. I think they will wish that they had been left to the boarding axes of angry men." "They are worth more alive than dead, Captain. Do you not wish to know why they have carried war to your people? How many of them there may yet be to attack, and other things? Also," Ross nodded at the fire now catching the second building, "why have they built up that blaze? Is it a signal to others of their kind?" "Very well said. Yes, it would be well for us to learn such things. Nor will Puka be jealous of the time we take to ask questions and get answers. Many answers." He prodded the Baldy with the toe of his sea boot. "How long will they remain so? Your magic has a bite to it." Ross smiled. "Not my magic, Captain. This weapon was taken from one of their own ships. As to how long they will remain so, that I do not know." "Very well, we can take precautions." Under Torgal's orders, the aliens were draped with capture nets like those Ross and Locust had worn. The sea-grown plant adhered instantly, wet strands knitting in perfect restrainers as long as it was uncut. Having seen to that, Torgal ordered the evacuation of Kyan-Ad. "As you say," he remarked to Ross, "that fire may well be a signal to bring down more of their kind. I think we have had the favor of Puka in this matter, but the prudent man stretches no favor of that kind too far. Also," he looked about him, "we have given to Puka and the Shades our dead. There is nothing for us here now but hate and sorrow. In one day we have been broken from a clan of pride and ships to a handful of standardless men.